My name is Sarika Batra, and my own seat at CRF is on the design side. It is my distinct privilege to welcome you back to our proceedings. Our morning's sessions effectively outline the remarkable architecture of India's digital rails. We examined how UPI has firmly established itself as a global reference point, and we explored the impending impact of stablecoins, CBDCs, and tokenized deposits. To unpack this, we have convened a panel representing regulatory, industry, and enforcement perspectives alongside a veteran journalist who has reported on all three. Steering this discussion are two moderators who approach the issue from distinct yet complementary vantage points. I welcome now Ms. Rutuja Paul, a partner at Ikigai Law, where her expertise sits at the intersection of regulatory, strategy, and technology, and Ms. Avni Goyal, a research analyst at the Center for Economy and Trade at the Chintan Research Foundation. I welcome our first speaker, Mr. Abhinav Kumar, 1996 batch IPS officer of the Uttar Pradesh cadre, currently serving as the Director General for Intelligence and Security in Uttarakhand. Mr. Sumanta Dey, Vice President of Public Policy at Delta Exchange. Mr. Aashish Aryan, a Senior Assistant Editor at Business Standard, leading their Technology, Policy Coverage and Legal Reporting Bureau. And finally, Mr. Dilip Chenoy, Chairman of the Bharat Web3 Association, having previously served as Secretary General of FICCI and Director General of SIAM. Please welcome our distinguished panel. Thank you.
All right. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I am Rutuja, and thank you for graciously staying back after the lovely lunch. Always, those people who stay back and listen to the rest of the panels after a lunch are my favorite kinds, so thank you. This session, we thought, we'll take a bit of a narrower approach and speak of certain specific issues that really hinder the way we look at digital economy in the country and potential impediments that exist between where we are today and how can India really embrace the whole digital economy and digital payments revolution. Much was talked earlier in the day about digital payments and UPI and transaction threshold values and so on and so forth. For this session, we thought we'll focus more around enforcement. But first, understand what are digital frauds, what are risks in the financial payment systems today, and explore the world of virtual digital assets, what comes from there in terms of potential frauds and not. And finally, look at some policy recommendations, considering we have a lovely assortment of panelists from different perspectives. So with that, I thought I'll hand it over to my co-panelist, Avni, to kick off the conversation.
Thank you, ma'am. Before I begin, I am definitely not an expert in the sector. I'm just a learner who's curious to know more about digital payments, and most of the questions are a result of my curiosity. And apologies in advance in case I mess up with all these experts sitting next to me. It's an honor to be with them. To begin our discussion, Aashish sir, I'd like to start by understanding your perspective on how digital frauds are evolving in today's ecosystem. Today, many scams don't begin with the banking system at all. They start with spoofed calls, phishing messages, fake links, or social engineering through telecom and digital platforms. This makes fraud prevention a much broader ecosystem challenge. What do you think? Should the responsibility for fraud prevention be distributed more evenly across telecom operators, digital platforms, and banks?
Thank you, Avni, and thank you, Rutuja. So when we talk about banking fraud, and like you said, that it's a large umbrella under which there are various sections, social engineering and direct fraud is there. And if we trace the journey of where fraud started and how easily it, how difficult initially it was, at least, to convince people, because not many of them were digitally even online. So it started with your, buying an Apple car or whatever you have, all those things. And now it is, like you mentioned, social engineering, where someone will convince you that you've done something wrong, and therefore you're liable to pay a fine, or you're liable to be withheld, or whatsoever, again, under the umbrella of digital arrests, etc. So if we trace that journey, we see that digital arrests, of course, the entire gambit of frauds, of course, they have become much more complex, and it will be very, very difficult for any one of us to pinpoint that this is the problem, or this is the solution to it. One could argue that the banking systems should be more robust, or the response time should be quicker, or the regulators should have more stricter checks and balances in place. And yet, it is a human being at these are human beings at both ends. One who's trying to get the money out of you, and the other which is not willingly falling prey, but still falling prey to that situation. So, in summation, really, if one were to say, it's a very complex task for regulators across various points, but what the start ideally should be to make people more, at least digitally aware and literate. And, one could also argue that not give them the entire freedom while that is being done, so that they are prevented from harming themselves. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. Taking this ahead, my next question would be to you, Abhinav, sir. What's the single biggest procedural bottleneck once a state police unit identifies a cross-border money trail? For instance, freezing speed, jurisdictional cooperation, or evidentiary standards?
I would say there are two concurrent procedural bottlenecks. One is, of course, jurisdictional. The interstate and increasingly the international characteristic of all these frauds. The money is moving very quickly from accounts in one state to another. So for state police forces, which typically have a statewide jurisdiction, the time lag in seeking cooperation from other state police forces or from central agencies, there is always a time lag. So that creates its own constraints for effective investigation. The second aspect, of course, is it's inbuilt into the structure of our IT Act. You see that currently the IT Act, my understanding of the IT Act is it was created purely from a facilitation perspective to help the IT industry grow and mature. It is less focused on the enforcement aspect. So to give you an example, currently the IT Act only allows officers of the rank of inspector rank and above to investigate digital frauds. Now this is such a huge, I'll give you an example of Uttarakhand Police Force. Out of a strength of about 28,000, we have about 700 odd inspector level posts. So given the scale of the number of cybercrime complaints we are receiving, we simply are not in a position to register all of them and investigate all of them effectively. So there's a huge amount of filtering we have to do at the supervisory level, which means the vast majority of cyber crimes go unregistered and therefore undetected. And so these are the two biggest constraints, I feel.
Thank you, sir. Now switching gears slightly, I'd like to turn to offshore platforms, which represent a significant challenge in securing India's digital payment rails. Mr. Sumanta Dey, sir, could you please enlighten us on what operational signals in terms of, say, INR pricing, rupee on stamps, local marketing, app store presence, etc., should regulators treat as evidence that an offshore platform is actively targeting Indian users?
Thank you. The crypto sector, VDA sector is sort of unique in the sense that this is perhaps the only digital sector where even offshore platforms who conduct VDA-related activity in India are allowed to do so, provided they are registered with FIU. Now that sort of presents some very interesting challenges, right? On the one hand, some of the offshore exchanges, Megha ma'am earlier in the panel mentioned there were 3 or 4 large offshore exchanges who are registered with FIU specifically for AML CFT compliance. But we also know the fact that a large percentage of Indian users, in fact, 3 out of every 4 trades in the VDA sector are conducted on offshore illegal platforms which are not registered in the country, don't have a resident status, don't pay taxes here, and therefore don't follow any other laws, right? The oxygen that sort of lets them breathe, this offshore operators who don't comply with the laws of the land, are 3 in nature. One is access through digital app stores that Indian consumers can go on to very easily and access them. Second is marketing and advertising. So they are able to target Indian consumers through all sorts of marketing means. And the third, of course, are the rupee on-ramp and off-ramp, which is essentially how do they collect money, how do they send money outside of India. All of these 3 elements taken together is what provides fuel to this offshore illegitimate sector. And therefore, the response also has to take all 3 sort of parameters together and cannot, as long as they work in silos, you're only solving one part of the problem. So I think all of these 3 signals are very important to identify who the offshore operators are who are not complying with the laws of the land, whether they are targeting Indian users actively or not through marketing, whether they are providing INR sort of support, conversion, and lastly, whether they are accessible on the digital network. There's a very interesting thing. In some jurisdictions abroad, platforms refer to something called reverse solicitation, right? They say that, we are not there in your jurisdiction. It is the customer who comes to us, we don't go to them. And I think the European Union took a very nuanced stance on this particular policy position under their MICA sort of framework, in which they said that any third nation platform, if you're not in the European Union, you cannot just take refuge under the fact that you are not actively soliciting, but the customer is coming to you. And there are a very, very narrow set of guidelines which determine whether reverse solicitation works or not. In due course, we might see something like that happening in India. I certainly hope so. But we definitely need to sort of block that angle as well, where platforms say that, hey, we don't have anything to do with you, but your consumers are coming to us through VPN networks or through other means, right? Thank you.
Thanks, Sumanta. Before we deep dive more into what offshore platforms are doing, I wanted to come to both Aashish and Abhinav for 2 questions around mule accounts. Aashish, for you, help us understand from all of the reporting that you've been doing, do you see a shift underway in how mule accounts are being detected? Are they still being post facto after a report has been lodged? Or are you seeing activity around freezing that is still happening before and after? And to Abhinav sir, actually walk us through the anatomy of how do you detect a mule account network activity? Like from the beginning till the end, how do you identify it, catch hold of it, and clamp down on it? First Aashish and then you.
So, mule accounts are not a new phenomenon. Ever since, frauds, you start from the likes of your, at least in popular names that you hear, from Jamtara, and then you move to Nu. The tradition or the way it has always been that it is transferred into multiple accounts at the same go. And now you have put a category of these are mule accounts which carry money, and therefore we need to ban them or we need to catch hold of them. But these are really people who would very happily trade their accounts because they are getting a cut of the payments that are coming. And, despite all of the advances in technology, it's very, very difficult, and I'm sure Abhinav sir would agree, to pinpoint and catch these people or make them accountable for not giving the accounts to fraudsters. They are at the bottom of the food chain. So even if you catch hold of them, and even if RBI, let's say, bans 40, 50, 100, thousands of such accounts, the new ones will crop up. They'll find newer people to, offer the same money. And people, because they are at the bottom of that economic scale also, will, of course, offer their accounts. So I don't think the solution is to really ban these mule accounts, or there has to be a solution where RBI identifies that, okay, these are the people who are using these mule accounts, and where is the ultimate end beneficiary of all this money going back, and therefore catch that culprit and work backwards from there to find the one person that is, initiating this. As they say, follow the money.
Right, right. Aashish sir, Abhinav sir, do you agree with that?
I think, if you look at the pattern of the profile of mule account holders, most of them are, at the very, very bottom of the financial sort of food chain. And to expect them to, have a sophisticated understanding of how they are being, manipulated, I think it's a very tall order. And I think the primary responsibility must be on the banking network itself. The banks must take greater responsibility for, identifying how to better profile usage of mule accounts, have systems in place for, shutting them down. And because I don't think, and because there is a legitimate public policy objective of expanding financial inclusion to, making sure it reaches the last sort of citizen. So with that sort of background in place, I don't think we can, necessarily go for a policy of, seeing large-scale shutdowns of access to bank accounts. It has to be, bank-driven or financial institution-driven system of profiling and, putting safeguards in place.
Right. No, that's a fair point. I wanted to, since a lot of time we're going to spend today around BDAs, I wanted to come to Mr. Chenoy to help us understand. So you're a part of the Bharat Web3 Association. So help us understand, purely from a consumer confidence perspective in the VDA space, what are the biggest determinants of technology adoption? How would you safeguard people and the usage of VDA in this country? And maybe perhaps for the audience, help us understand a little more about what is this VDA space? What are the multiple facets of it? And from there, talk about consumer protection and confidence.
Okay, so thank you for that, and thank you, CRF, for inviting me, and thank you for accommodating my request for not being part of the earlier panel, right? But, I think, Rutuja, there are 2 or 3 things in your question. First of all, when we look at it and we are talking about digital fraud, right? In the VDA space, we tend to look at it as people trading on exchanges and being frauded, right? But there's a lot more to the Web3 ecosystem that is there. You have decentralized or autonomous organization, DAOs, which actually do some, you have decentralized ledger networks, you have layer 1, layer 2, a lot of people are building projects on it, right? So there are a lot of use cases, the digitization of land records, the digitization of certificates, there's the digitization of real estate or tokenization of real estate. There's even tokenization of whiskey caskets in the UK or tokenization of ships. I'm just putting the broad framework which is there. So there's a lot going on in this space. Now, frankly, if you are a consumer of any of the products and services, any digital, it could be even a simple thing like UPI. Okay, people don't understand how many UPI frauds there are through phishing or through other aspects here. So the first thing, most important aspect in this space is educating the consumer, right? Because you have to continue, like Avinash said, that you got to, banks got to educate the consumers, etc. You got to educate the consumers, right? And from the BWA point of view, we started a big consumer campaign. We did a 100-day campaign. We are starting a next campaign on how do you educate the consumer for a very, very simple thing. I mean, just to take, if I have Sumanta.com, right? Someone can start Sumanta with a double A at the end. And they'll think that they're actually dealing with Sumanta, but they're dealing with somebody else. So same thing, it could be Dilip.Chenoy and Dilip.Chenoy. For a consumer, it doesn't make any difference. So the consumer education is number one in this space, across digital space, even for digital arrests, right? Or even, you get a call, okay, your electricity will be cut off by 10 o'clock if you don't pay on this link. All of these things are issues of consumer education is number one. The second thing is that most of these frauds or cybersecurity breaches or hacks or whatever you want to call are all done through social engineering. And therefore, if you are, general counsels in your organizations, you got to make sure that you have very strict laws of how people handle their computers, how they handle the phone, how do they get into, allow anybody else to come in. That is the number 2 priority, where you need to have very strong, people will apply to you for a job, okay? When BWA, we have a very frequent, or we have a cybersecurity conference and we have a cybersecurity guidelines. In that, one of our members presented the photographs of X number of certain nationality who actually seek jobs in your company to actually social engineer and fraud you from inside. So the other thing is that what happens is when you do interoperable systems, okay? To give you an example, you want to go and pay something and it gives you a link from your bank account, right? It's a different thing. This is not really a phishing thing. It's actually you think you're doing a genuine transaction. And the third thing which Avinash sir also mentioned was the jurisdiction gap, right? And you have to actually address it. The zero FIR concept is very interesting in India, but many people hesitate to use the zero FIR for a cybercrime. And we need to actually have a different way. If when one of our members was hacked, it took him 3 months or 4 months to even register an FIR. So, and I don't know how many people know about 1930, right? Which is the other thing. So the consumer education, and these are the 3 points I'm really like to say: the interoperability gap, the jurisdictional gap, and the literacy gap. We have to address this together going forward. And individuals, companies, and the government. I actually have a suggestion for Avinav Kumar, but on the inspector issue, but we'll come to that later.
Okay, I'll come back to you on that one. Because you talked about, bridging the gap of education and knowledge, I wanted to come to Sumanta with a single A this time. On Sumanta, from an exchange perspective, I mean, before that, public discourse oftentimes treats crypto, which is offshore crypto in this case, and banking fraud as sometimes the same problems, right? In case of an exchange, what indicators distinguish a fraud-linked VDA transfer from ordinary retail trading activity? How do you differentiate between the two? So from an exchange perspective, what indicators distinguish a fraud-linked VDA transfer from ordinary retail trading activity?
Okay. So, the registered, FIU registered entities, they've really invested behind transaction monitoring and reporting. And I think in this case, what happens is a pattern, and recognizing a pattern becomes more important than a single activity. And the pattern is essentially against itself, right? So for example, if there is a new account which has been opened with an exchange, and the first transaction, or one of the first few transactions, is of a very large amount, right? That itself should be monitored. That's number one. Number two, if the person who has opened the account is not ready to provide information about source of funds or things like that, that's another red flag. So whether an account that has been opened on a VDA exchange interacts with accounts that are already flagged in the system as possibly fraudulent or having some sort of risks. These sort of things, when it comes to the registered FIU exchanges, are quite easily caught, I would say, because people understand the risks. The exchanges definitely are extremely vigilant. The issue is, like I mentioned earlier, that 3 out of 4 trades are happening outside of these exchanges. And that's the regulatory arbitrage, unfortunately, which bad actors are sort of, taking an advantage of. And that's where greater collaboration between government and industry is required, because if we need to educate customers, I think a collaborative effort between the government and industry is absolutely critical. For example, a large part of the risk that we hear associated with the crypto industry, actually that risk comes from private wallets, and that risk comes from situations which are outside of the exchange's control. The moment consumers are educated to limit their activity to, let's say, a certain set of exchanges, or to not fall prey to private wallets, private transactions that go outside of the regular banking net, that sort of sensitization is extremely important, because otherwise, it's a regulatory tax arbitrage that offshore operators are sort of exploiting.
You wanted to comment, Dilip sir? Yeah.
So I think it's very important here for us to understand a couple of things. The first is that in the banking world and in the non-VDA space, you have a lot of automatic sharing of information. There's an RBI e-mule account, there's a KYC, there are other such things here. State police departments or union have blacklisted accounts. Unfortunately, at this point of time, that is not available to the VDA sector. So the first policy change is whether you want to regulate this sector or not regulate this sector, that sharing of information has to be done, okay? The second point is this, that if you look at actors within the sector, this is between law enforcement agencies and, let's say, the private sector, which does not really run foul of the DPDP Act or something like that. But within the private sector, if exchange A or wallet provider A or a certain service provider B something has bad actors, today the DPDP Act as interpreted, unfortunately, hopefully, if the yesterday High Court judgment is a good flag bearer in this, where they're saying DPDP does not extend to illegal acts, right? Again, you guys are the lawyers, you'll know it better than I do. If that is extended, or there's a policy recommendation there to extend that to all digital frauds, etc., then there will be a huge advancement in this. And these are policy steps which does not necessarily regulate the VDA sector, but improves customer confidence, reduces cyber frauds, and generally for the betterment of the public.
That's helpful. Just speaking of pattern spotting and government speaking with the industry, Abhinav, I wanted to come to you. In your investigation playbook, do you think it will look a little different if you were looking at transactions happening through VDAs versus conventional accounts?
I must confess, I've not studied that. This is just too new a field for me to give a considered answer to that. I would, from a larger perspective, my bigger concern is, we've made a sort of a fetish of complete privacy and anonymity in the digital space. And I think that creates a huge vulnerability. In the real world, whether you're using the physical highway or any other this thing, the anonymity is not absolute. Whereas here, I think, so I think strengthening your KYC norms, initiating, creating protocols where at every stage of the transaction, it becomes easy for both parties to know each other's identity with a certain degree of certainty. I think that element needs to be built into the architecture.
But I think that's already happening to an extent. Aashish and Sumanta, if you want to come in.
Like I said, I'm not an expert on that subject, but my understanding is that the sheer ease with which these frauds are taking place, I think there is still a huge gap in your KYC compliance and KYC enforcement.
Abhinav, you wanted to comment?
So if you're comparing, like sir said, that there is, of course, a gap in how these compliance norms are implemented. And on ground, even if they are implemented in a very, robust manner, the problem with most places is that, at the very basic level, someone who's conducting the KYC has no incentive to do it properly. Because for them, it's just another task that they have to tick off the list. And there are 50 homes or 50 places that he or she has to visit. And therefore, the onus or the responsibility that the person sitting at the top thinks that KYC brings is unfortunately missing at the ground level, where the person conducting KYC just has to tick off the names of list and, complete his KRA for the day and go home and get his payment for the day. Because most of these workers are like what you would classify as gig worker, that they have come here to do this job for maybe 2-3 months while they are working on something else or while they are studying or whatever. And they will eventually, sort of move on. So there I sort of tend to agree that it's extremely, the disparity is far too much when it comes to the top and the bottom, especially with as a simple thing as simple as KYC.
Got it. Thanks. I mean, if we just looked at offshore platforms, right, and I wanted to come to Sumanta before that, help us understand, you're an exchange operating within India's compliance perimeter, right? It's how do you compete with offshore platforms who don't have to do all of the same compliance measures and do all of the hard work when it comes to KYC, TDS, or reporting, other reporting obligations?
I'd frame it, not from a competition lens, but rather from a consumer protection lens. I think the level playing field and consumer protection lens, when it comes to the offshore segment, is more important. If there is an offshore operator that is registered in India, that complies with India's laws, tax laws, other regulations, then that is fair competition for us. But if the arbitrage is in the mind of the customer, that I can go on a particular platform, I don't need to do KYC, I don't need to pay taxes, I don't need to do any of that, then that becomes a consumer protection problem, because then the customer has no recourse. When frauds happen, they don't know whom to approach, what to do. So I think for the domestic sector, it's very important that we try to educate customers, but at the same time, for regulators as well, to try to see how much of the offshore volume can be possibly migrated to the onshore compliant networks so that there is greater monitoring and reporting.
That's helpful insight. Thanks. I'm going to come back to Abhinav sir on his investigation playbook. I think that's one of my favorite topics on this panel. So help us understand the multiple players that you have to coordinate with, especially when it comes to tracking down any kind of financial offense, right? Is it maybe coordinations with the FIU unit in India or other law enforcement agencies across the country, interstate coordination, inter-country coordination? How does it look like for you, and how easy or difficult has it been? What are the bottlenecks there? Could you just unpack that for us? Information sharing, we've got fairly robust, the architecture which has evolved. We have the I4C, which is a sort of like a central clearing house of information. All the state police organizations now have some cybercrime sort of fighting capability. We've, over the last decade or so, most state police forces have invested in training of their personnel and getting the requisite hardware and software in place. So it is a work in progress. But so on that side, we have a much better picture of the pattern of cybercrime. I think in terms of, like I said, there are serious bottlenecks in terms of capacity to investigate it, and as well as the interstate and the international ramifications. I think that I've argued about this on various platforms.
including in-house consultations with Government of India. I think the time has probably come to consider creating a federal level investigating agency, or like the CBI is for economic offenses, or the ED is for economic offenses, the NIA is for terror-related offenses. Perhaps a national level federal cybercrime investing agency is a need of the hour. I don't, because I don't think any state police force, given their other responsibilities and challenges and commitments, has the wherewithal, or the state governments have the resources available to fight this crime on this scale. I mean, I'll just give you a small example. In 2024 or 2023, the scale of frauds or money lost through cyber crimes was about 23,000 crores. Whereas in the real world, the total amount of property that was lost due to theft, due to fraud, due to dacoity, due to loot, was about 2,500 crores. So already 3 years ago, the total scale of money being lost through this category of crime was 10 times the level of money we lost to traditional crime. So with this kind of imbalance, surely it must also be reflected in the investments we make in our enforcement capacity, in our investigation capacity. So this would be my understanding of the issue.
I'm glad you bring it up to that level, because that was my next question actually. The Financial Intelligence Unit has proposed setting up a virtual asset lab. And I wanted to ask Sumanta and Dilip sir on these two pieces. One, what do you think the constitution of the asset lab should look like, and where should it really be situated? What should its powers look like? To sir's point, right? If there can be one federal agency that looks at communicating with everybody and for everybody, from that perspective, do you think the VAL does a fair bit of problem solving? First Sumanta and then Dilip.
This is a classic case of upward delegation, but anyway. So let's look at it this way. I think there are two things here. If you look at the banking sector, right, and cybercrime, there's a very strong national coordination under I4C. And there's a real-time collaboration between the banking sectors, the credit card companies, I4C, and also the state-level agencies. They all sit on the same floor. And it's real-time coordination, right? So in effect, we do have a central coordination mechanism, right? But then, since the crime happens in cyberspace and happens in a particular state and the actors are differently located, reaching there is a challenge. Now, you can actually extend that into I4U and in the virtual digital asset sector, right? Very, very simply. And I think it's going to happen. It could be one of the recommendations that you make, but I think it's actually going to happen. The second thing, it is very important here, right? That given the changes that are happening in the regulatory regime and in the taxation regime in India, you have to declare virtual digital asset holding, right? Okay. Now, the current thought process is that if you have virtual digital asset holding and TDS has not been deducted, you can actually get away with it. But that's temporary, because currently the focus of the law enforcement agencies is if you're holding virtual digital assets and TDS has been deducted, but you've not paid the 30% tax, or you've not claimed the refund of 1%, they're targeting you. So and unlike the cash economy or the gold economy or the real estate economy, where transactions can be obfuscated and can't be tracked, in the virtual digital and on-chain activity, after 15 years, if you do a transaction, you can get caught, right? That's a very significant thing here. So, but the general user is not aware of all of this, because he thinks or she thinks that you can get away with it. So I think that this arbitrage is slowly going to go away, right? And you're going to see greater, and I think, I said I'll come back to that point later. Avinash sir, if you have an inspector centrally located in your headquarters, digitally connected to other inspectors or sub-inspectors or other people, but he's the investigation officer centrally and the other people are helping him, you overcome the Cyber Act law. I'm sure you're doing it. Yeah. And the thing here is that given cybersecurity and given all of this, unfortunately, we cannot talk as much as we are doing. Because the more you talk, the more you inform, the other people will try and be 2 or 3 steps ahead. So there are a lot of things that are happening which we can't disclose, but it's there.
Something you said?
To respond to this, you see, we are doing that. I mean, in the sense that we formally, on paper, the inspector is the investigating officer of the case, but in practice, a lot of the case diaries are being, filled in by his subordinates. But again, there is a huge capacity constraint. Again, to give you the example of Uttarakhand, my state, last year we had about 15,000 odd crimes under the BNS, the new, the Nyaya Sanhita, the new IPC. We also had 15,000 cases of serious cyber crimes being reported. And out of those, we were only able to, convert about 500 odd of them into actual FIRs. Simply because of this, because even if, with inspectors and sub-inspectors, this thing, our caseload is, because of cybercrime, it's twice as much as what it was before this category of crime came into existence. So therefore, even with this, workaround, we are not able to cater to all serious complaints of cybercrime. So so we have to invest in increasing the number of IOs available for,
That makes sense, yeah. Sumanta, for the more deeper dive in the...
Just to sort of augment to Dilip sir's point, the virtual asset lab is actually a very welcome move, as and when it happens. It's so far a recommendation in the FATF report. But I think offshore operators, as we've seen, they move very, very fast. And even though periodically there are takedowns, it's more like whack-a-mole, right? They mushroom and they come out sometimes with greater intensity. In fact, according to I have some numbers here, according to a SCR report, when India blocked a set of offshore exchanges, traffic to 9 blocked exchanges actually surged 57%, and offshore activity climbed 77% in a 9-month window in 2024. So my larger point being that I think we need more expertise in this, especially when it comes to the VDA sector. So perhaps the virtual asset lab could have greater, better blockchain forensic analysis. Money in the VDA ecosystem moves through wallets, through exchanges, through DeFi products. So we've got, we need greater expertise in this, and perhaps the virtual asset lab will be able to sort of solve some of this.
I think, yes, greater expertise for sure would be a good idea, because when we were trying to constitute this panel, it was difficult to find people who would be able to help us understand offshore activity and activities in the VDA space. And I thought, one thought that came to my mind was, yes, we need a lot more experts in this space who can help us unpack the issues with greater degree of nuance more. I know we're at time, so I'll hand it over to Avni for a last round of recommendations or last final thoughts that all of you have from all of your respective perspectives.
Yes, now in this final segment of our discussion, to begin with, I would like to ask Abhinav sir, what legal or procedural reform would most improve your ability to act before funds are moved out of reach and not after? And also, what legal or procedural reforms would most improve the speed of freezing fraudulent transactions?
Field, as with all other areas of crime, I think the one basic principle of that prevention is better than cure. I think we need to invest a great deal more in prevention protocols. and also in risk mitigation. I mean, I feel that, you know, the time is ripe for some kind of a insurance scheme which is targeted specifically at cybercrime, which is where the cost of this insurance is shared equally by the financial institutions as well as the consumers. I mean, you know, I don't know what the current state of regulation in this field is, but I think given the scale of money that is being lost to the cyber frauds, some kind of deposit insurance where the consumer and the financial institution, you know, bear this cost, I think that it's a need of the hour. The second thing which I mentioned earlier, right now the I4C does a very good job of, you know, collecting information and transmitting information, but the enforcement, at the federal level and the international level capability for enforcement, for investigation is missing. So a federal level agency which has enforcement capabilities, which can easily requisition, you know, support from state police forces and act independently, you know, across state borders, as well as liaise with international agencies. I think that those are the two most important regulators.
Thank you, sir. And my next question is to you, Aashish, sir. From 5 years from now, do you expect digital fraud to become primarily an AI problem, a regulatory problem, or an institutional coordination problem? Or any other policy recommendations that you think could future-proof India's digital payments ecosystem?
I don't think it will be, you know, it could very well be a combination of all the problems that you have mentioned, because as, you know, like we were discussing earlier, currently at both ends of the, you know, wherever fraud is happening, there's a human being at both ends, one which is trying to deceive you and one which is trying to save themselves, and whether willingly or unwillingly they fall prey to it. With AI, this moves much faster, where you'll have systems or agents that will try to convince you, which will have those social engineering skills, and they'll learn while on the go that they'll try to convince you that you are, you know, you're not falling into a trap. So that problem, I think, becomes much, you know, bigger and larger. If you really have to contain it, let's say in the next 5 years, the solutions would be, and I think Sumanta would agree, that there should be a uniform blockchain kind of approach. And like Sir mentioned, that even if 15 years down the line you do a transaction, someone can point out that this is the fraud that was conducted 15 years ago, and therefore you should be held responsible for it even after 15 years.
Thanks. Thank you, sir. Dilip sir, let me end with you. The FIU has proposed setting up a virtual asset lab for better enforcement and capability building. No, I'm asking, what's the association's view on the industry? What's the association?
Since we looked at the VL question, maybe we can talk about BWA's positioning around consumer safety, and have there been any conversations you have been having with the FIU on how the VL should be constituted and anything around that?
So there are two separate sections. I think the virtual digital lab has been addressed by Sumanta, but I think I would like to put it from an industry perspective, right? So BWA has done multiple things, right? So we actually have a self-regulatory code on consumer protection, right? Where, you know, a lot of the things are there that you got to have 1:1 reserve, right? Okay. Second, I think the point that Abhinav sir raised about the insurance, we've also been talking. Currently, no insurance available in India, and the cost of insurance there is very easy for IRDA to, you know, do a consult and bring an insurance product out. The third thing that we have within ourselves is cyber security code, right? And as pointed out earlier, that, you know, today there is no legal recognition of a smart contract, right? So, you know, smart contract, okay, which is all what you're actually seeing here, right? So we need substantial change in regulation of how it happens here to enable that to happen. And we within BWA brought in a cybersecurity kind of best practice guideline, which is updated here, and we work very closely with certain. When they issue an update, we actually work with them. So industry has a responsibility to ensure that consumers are protected and consumers are addressed. But that's not going to address some of the points that you discussed here, whether people voluntary doing P2P exchanges or voluntary doing using an overseas exchange or unregulated exchange. Our pitch, not because we are BWA, our pitch is that please use an FIU registered exchange or an FIU custody provider or whatever it is, right, to actually transact things. So customers have to be there. And there are two types of customers. Customers who want to follow the law and customers who don't want to follow the law. The law enforcement agencies and FIU and FATF all are trying to get the people who are not following the law to follow the law, and international cooperation under FATF, the travel rule and the virtual disclosure thing that we're having is all trying to get this here. It's not going to end in one day. It's going to take some time, but it has to be industry and government working together. And from BWS perspective, we are always looking at that. We are a compliance-led entity.
Thank you, sir. I wanted to just close quickly with Sumanta. I know you had your mic up to have a comment on what he was saying, but just from a regulatory recommendation perspective, right? What kind of reform do you think would be needed in the next, say, 2 to 5 years to prevent digital fraud from happening in the VDA space?
I think my number one recommendation would be to, come at this problem more aggressively, not only look at exchanges, but VDA-related activity, but essentially anything where crypto is enabled as a payment option, right? And for example, nowadays, there are gambling websites, there are prediction markets, there are some gaming websites where one of the payment options being provided is a crypto transfer. And a large part of the risk that comes to the sector comes from such platforms which actually don't have anything to do with the investor or financial activity of crypto exchange, whatever crypto exchanges do, but they enable crypto as a payment mechanism for some other activity. For example, in 2024, the RBI actually issued an alert list of, I think, 80 plus derivative platforms in India, CFD platforms, and essentially it's still there on their website. They are cautioning the public and the banking sector not to sort of deal with them. Now you look at these CFD platforms, pretty much all of them have crypto as a payment option. So you can take a trade on any of these CFD platforms by paying through crypto. Now what happens is, while the alert list is there, while some amount of enforcement action has happened, the moment enforcement action happens against a particular platform, another mushrooms in its place and not only takes the previous volume, but builds volume on its own, right? So I think greater sort of oversight over adjacent sectors that enable crypto as a payment mechanism needs to be strengthened. And of course, the industry is always willing to work with government on this. We need close collaboration and eventually sort of try to figure a way out.
Sounds good, yes. Greater scrutiny over adjacent sectors sounds like a good plan to end this conversation on. With that, I think I'll thank you all for coming in today for this very, very diverse discussion on all segments. I would have liked for it to be a little more narrow, but I guess we'll reserve that for the next time. Thank you so much. Oh yeah, do we have any audience Q&A? Yes. Oh, it's a Balu sir. 1, 2, and 3. Yes, we have 3 questions. Please keep them short. Thanks.
Thank you. Sir, it was nice to listen. I have identified in the morning also. I am J.K. Bhatti, earlier with the RISE, that is a public sector under Ministry of Railways. My question is to Mr. Dilip Chenoy. Although you have mentioned most of the points, but one main question why I am asking that has not been answered so far. As per MHA report, last year, cyber fraud complaints were nearly 36 lakhs and estimated loss was 22,000 crore. If you see, artificial intelligence makes digital frauds and identity theft more sophisticated. My question is, how can Web3 technologies make digital transactions and identities more secure for end users? Thank you.
Should we finish with the questions first? Balu sir, you want to go next?
So thank you. It's an interesting panel. I think there is a new company which is being formed, Indian Digital Payment Intelligence Platform, by SBI and Bank of Baroda, an IBA initiative. You think that will succeed like NPCI in reducing the frauds? That's what I'm interested in knowing. Thank you.
Your question is directed to who, sir? Okay, anybody, all right.
Yeah, Mr. Abhinav, these types of frauds happen because of failure of technology. In China, they teach their students 5 years for hacking courses. In India, we are not so strong enough in this type of courses. So first, we have to have a global training courses so that, like Interpol, why not have these courses like this so that we can have control over this?
Our law enforcement agencies, it has, it is progressing. I mean, we are far better equipped to deal with cyber crimes than we were 5 years ago. And I think we must understand that, between the adoption of a technology, between its regulation, and between enforcement of laws relating to that sector, there is always going to be a gap. But I think given the speed of adoption of digital payment systems and all kinds of innovative financial products, our capacity building has to really speed up. And I agree with you. I mean, they must, we need to explore greater opportunities for international collaboration and international training programs. I don't think currently the appetite for a very close-knit international cooperation exists simply because of the different systems and different regulatory international cooperation in this sector is very, very difficult. I mean, even in the physical world, investigating crimes with a trans-border implication has been very, very difficult. So I don't see any, that is going to remain a challenge for the foreseeable future.
I do not know how relevant this would be in the circumstances, but we talk about frauds in India, VDA in the virtual digital asset category, but we never talk about the ones which Indian call centers in Noida, based out of Noida, your Calcutta, are doing globally, extracting money. So how is that being addressed? Because I think the volume, if you see, as compared to what is being operated from India in terms of looting from global, insurance fraud, all these things. So that is a very small, as compared to what happens in the VDA kind of format, it's very small. So what are we doing in that format to this thing? Why should any other agency cooperate with us when we do not cooperate with American agencies for these kind of cases? So how do you want to take that? I do not know how relevant that would be. I feel that this is also on the same.
Maybe that one you can take it offline with the two.
So three quick answers, very, very quick. I know we're running out of time, and also Dr. Gulshan Rai waiting there. But okay, the first one is, we have to look at numbers a bit differently. If you were to go back 5 years or 10 years from now, the number would be small because the total volume of digital transactions we did was small. Now the 23,000 crores is what percentage of the total digital transactions that we do every day. So the greater number of transactions that you do, you will have greater number of frauds. So we got to start a new metric for that way we analyze it. And you'll see that the number is, and it's much easier to counter a digital fraud. Maybe difficult to retrieve the money because it's traveled elsewhere, but that soon also will become a kind of thing going forward. the more private sector, more nationalized banks, the more players come together and create common platforms to solve the problem, the better. Don't forget the virtual digital asset sector and make them inclusive in the programs going forward. The third thing, actually you could be located anywhere and commit a fraud on anybody using telephone, right? It's a crime to use a foreign number to do India. This thing, there are many platforms in India. If you book something, you suddenly get a call back from an international number. So we have to actually strengthen enforcement. Enforcement will only be strengthened if you collaborate. And the bottom line, and you cannot get away from it, the more aware the consumer, the more vigilant the consumer, the more vigilant that is there, you're helping the law enforcement agency, and the more compliant the consumer, you are helping avoid all of this.
That's fair enough. Everybody should talk to everybody is the bottom line of this conversation. So thank you so much. I think we're going to close the panel now.
I now ask Sanjeev sir to please felicitate the speakers with the mementos.